A writer at The Guardian has written a complaint accusing the newspaper of deceiving its readers for using the word woman in its headline. Louise Tickle is boycotting the paper for failing to tell its readers that a cat killer who murdered a stranger was in fact transgender. The BBC has now put in their 2 pennies worth, reporting on the same story, but again, failing to mention the killer, Scarlett Blake, was transgender. Joining me now is Director of Case Operations and Outreach at Free Speech Union, Mr. Ben Jones. Ben, very, very good evening to you. Welcome to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. I see that J.K. Rowling has joined into the fray tonight, having seen the ridiculous report in The Guardian and the letter of complaint from Louise Tickle. She said, I'm so sick of this shizer, for want of a better word. This is not a woman. These are not our crimes. I mean, this is now getting to beyond a joke, isn't it? I mean, it's one thing to say you must be able to call a trans woman a woman, but surely it's a trans woman when you're reporting on a court case and somebody's been found guilty of murder.
I don't know about you, Mike, but every time I log into Twitter, it seems to be every week there's one of these cases where there is some obscene, graphic, sexual violence or murder or rape or some horrific crime that's been committed that is inexplicably, mysteriously attached to somebody with she and her pronouns that defies all common sense and all the experience of people who are actually alive, living in the real world, and know that the overwhelming majority of violent sexual crimes are committed by men. Yeah. We all know this. It's obvious. Right. It's perfectly clear. And yet we have media outlets, including the BBC, unfortunately, that consistently lie to readers, viewers, listeners about what's going on.
Well, that's right. I mean, and the complaint letter is very straightforward. You know, Louise Tickle talks about reading the story on Saturday, and at no time in the story was she under the impression that the murder, and the horrific murder that it was committed by a man. She thought it was committed by a woman. There was no reference to transgender. There was no reference to the previous name of the individual. And it seems to me that surely is willful bias, actually leaving out facts from a story, which is the cardinal error of any journalistic skill, isn't it?
Well done to her for standing up to it. It takes some courage to do that. I think she'd been writing for the paper for decades. So it does take some moral courage and some backbone, and to have the courage of your convictions to defy your employer and stand up for common sense in that way, and to stand up for the Guardian's readers who, like the readers and viewers of all media outlets, deserve to have the truth reported to them.
And she says quite rightly, news reporters should only report facts and newspapers should only publish facts in their news sections. I mean, she's not even saying that you can't have a columnist who does this kind of thing. You can't have an opinion piece written by somebody at The Guardian in which they continually name this person as a woman. That would be fine, even for Louise Tickle. But it's not fine to put it in the news section, and the BBC should know that as well.
Well, it's incredible, I think, with the BBC that there's been this great moral panic in the last 5 years about misinformation, the danger that misinformation poses to democracy. And there is, of course, BBC Verify, which sets out to challenge misinformation and to correct it. It seems completely outrageous that the BBC with the left hand is doing that, and with the right, it's pumping out misinformation of this sort that's completely transparent, that everyone with any common sense can see through.
Yes. Well, I mean, unfortunately for BBC Verify, the woman who runs BBC Verify, their information reporter, it turns out actually faked her own CV in order to get a job. So, I mean, the BBC Verify brand, shall we say, is not exactly doing particularly well. And they're not doing particularly well either at verifying their own actual output, because they're very good at verifying other people's, but when it comes to actually looking in on themselves, they don't seem to want to do that too often.
No, and I think the BBC is still able to sort of trade off its legacy reputation. And I often speak to particularly older people who just trust the BBC because they've always trusted the BBC. Yeah. They always watch the 6 o'clock news. They always watch Newsnight. And yet we've got to a position where basically, unless you're on social media, unless you can see these sorts of debates going on Twitter, and you can see the live debunking of these sorts of stories by Twitter users, you can consume this kind of output from the BBC or other media outlets and be none the wiser as to what's actually going on. I wouldn't surprise me if there were people who really thought there was a spate of horrific murders and crimes being committed by women, because they've got no idea that there is now this custom across most of the media to refer to allegedly transgender convicts, prisoners, suspects by whatever pronouns they take a fancy to.
I mean, I love the fact that Louise has also actually rewritten the story for them and shown them how they could have done it. final 2 paragraphs, a man who live-streamed himself killing, dissecting and blending the body of a cat before brutally attacking a man and leaving him to drown to death in a river months later has been convicted of murder. The man, 26, who goes by the name Scarlett Blake and who asserts he is female, says he is transgender, targeted Jorge Martin Carreño, 30, as he walked home from a night out in Oxford in July 2021. And there's your picture. I mean, that reads perfectly straightforwardly as a news story, reads perfectly well to anyone who needs to know what the facts of the case are. You know, you call me old-fashioned, but it was always who, what, where and when were the main things you needed to know. Not, you know, what can you conceal from the story so that people don't get upset.
I think the worst thing for me, although the media reporting is aggravating, I think the worst thing is when you see exchanges taking place during trials, people, including families of the victim or victims in case of sexual violence, have been told that they have to refer to the accused using she or her pronouns. Yes. Which is completely outrageous. Nobody should be compelled to use pronouns. If you see it as a matter of personal politeness to refer to a trans person by their new pronouns, well, that's your choice, that's fine. But the Free Speech Union is very strongly of the view that nobody should be compelled to use pronouns. If you happen to think like I do, that you cannot change your sex, you cannot change your gender, then you should not be made to use these new pronouns for somebody who says they're transgender or somebody who's transgender. It's a matter of individual choice and individual conscience whether you do that. But the fact that's happening during trials, I think, is outrageous. And the fact that this is the new standard across so much of the media is pretty appalling.
Right.